Someone's endorsement of you, or lack thereof, has very little to do with your trajectory. I had to stop and go, wait, say that again? Hi, I'm Aaron Ryan, author, writer of Dissonance and The End, both post-apocalyptic end times and fiction sagas. Very proud of them. Forecast, which is a 9/11 historical fiction thriller, working on my 27th, 28th, and 29th books. You can find me at authoraaronryan.com, getthesebooks.com, or thisisnottheend.com. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by an amazing author writing dystopian sci-fi, among other works that we may get into depending on our time here. He is a very talented writer in itself. He's coming to the show today as a first-time guest, talking about Dissonance and The End. Whichever one we talk about. I believe we're talking about Dissonance, if I recall correctly. But we're joined by the ever-talented Aaron Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Doing good. You know,
Good.
For those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
Well, I'm definitely bringing a geek. So if it's Two Geeks Talking, I'm definitely like 50% checking off the geek column. I've been a geek ever since I was a kid. Just love sci-fi, love fantasy. I'm wearing a ring, Lord of the Rings necklace around my neck. It's not the One Ring, just to clarify. See, I'm still here, still here. But it actually has my family's names engraved on the inside. But big Lord of the Rings fan. I love sci-fi. I love post-apocalyptic and dystopian genres. Read a lot and have written a lot. I'm a voiceover artist. You can see my studio back there. And the studio mascot lying quietly on the love seat in there. But voiceovers are an industry that's kind of taking a hit via AI, the economy and the SAG-AFTRA strike and underbidders and lowballers and all that. So I've pivoted back to authoring and written a lot of books to that effect, working on a great new trilogy. So pretty excited.
That's awesome. I love that. The fact that you're able to go to different avenues of creativity is from voice to being an author. I think that's amazing to see here. Now, when you first signed up for this particular interview, Dissonance was kind of on the forefront of this particular interview itself here. But tell us about Dissonance and then tell us about The End, because those are two completely separate series. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I've pretty much made up my mind that The End is going to be a trilogy. It's not going to be six. When I started writing Dissonance, I really intended to write just a singular novel. This is the first one I'm holding up. This is Dissonance Volume I Reality. Gone through several cover changes, but I've landed on this guy. This is our happy little Gorgon here, very terrifying. There was just so much more story to tell when I was done with this, nearing the end of it and decided, I've got to write a trilogy. There's more than enough story here. As I'm going through, I realized that there's just a subtle undercurrent of another story running through it. That's what, gave me the beef and the meatiness to write that the rest of the trilogy. But man, then it spawned two prequels and a sequel. Just kept writing itself. This one's actually been adapted for the screen and it's being pitched to streaming networks right now. So I'm stoked about that. And I finished last year and I'm now working on a Christian, clean fiction, post-apocalyptic, kind of an end times spin, although it's not the tribulation and revelation, but it's along those lines. It's coming along really well. I'm nearing the end of volume one.
What is the most misunderstood aspect about dystopian sci-fi that people who don't follow the genre misunderstand?
That's a really good question. I mean, honestly, when people talk about sci-fi, when they talk about post-apocalyptic sci-fi and dystopian sci-fi, post-apocalyptic largely, I don't know why, but in so many people's minds, it suggests zombies.
Hmm.
And I hate that because I have post-apocalyptic sagas, two of them now. One is finished, one is underway. Nothing to do with zombies at all. Dystopian, though, is largely, you think of dystopian, you think of like the Hunger Games. There's a power differential between the haves and the have-nots, the elite and the poor, to be served and the servees. I think one of the things that's misunderstood about it is I think in talking with other authors, they are told that largely people think their book is a referendum on something. We're making a statement on something, like it's an indictment of today's society, the hierarchies thereof. It's not really the case. We're all geeks, when we write this type of stuff. It's basically just a dive into fiction, and there's a challenge to overcome. That's the nature of dystopia and post-apocalyptic scenarios.
So, what was the last challenge you had to overcome yourself in your own personal life?
In my own personal life or my authoring life? Boy, I'm a parent. I have an 8 and a 5-year-old, so those are my boys back there. Actually, point to them there. Brennan is almost 9, and Asher is 5. And so we went to our first monster truck jam this past Sunday. I've never been to one. As a parent, it's always the hey, yay, that sounds awesome. Let's do that. I'm so excited for the monster jam. And then they get there, and then one of them is gung ho over it, and the other one is like, "Can we go home?" And it's just like, if you had any clue the money I paid for the tickets for these things, Grandpa came with us. He's out there getting, drinks and chicken tenders, and I'm hungry. You got headphones, you got a nice coat on, you're warm, you got your family. It's like, come on. So there's that challenge you have to overcome. Writing the latest saga, really, I'm trying to steer very clear of, out of reverence for the Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins Left Behind series that was, a Christian end times saga in the 90s. Trying to steer clear of that. It's got my own spin on this one. It's a fine line to walk.
The influences obviously are always going to be there. Being a geek, obviously you have many influences, and you've already mentioned a couple here as well, which is wonderful to see. But it's got to be hard to separate yourself from a writing perspective and a creative perspective when it comes to trying to put your own mark on the world.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I counsel other authors, I'm not a coach, but I have been a coach in voiceovers and in other capacities. I love the phrase from Oscar Wilde, be yourself, everyone else is already taken. They are. And it's just for you to come in and go marching to the beat of your own drum, but also say your drum is Tolkien's drum, or is Isaac Asimov's drum, or Suzanne Collins' drum, or anybody, Tom Clancy, Michael Crichton, Stephen King, authors that are notable and famous. Just don't do that. You can do an occasional tip of the hat or a nod if you feel you need to, a credit where credit is due. But it's so important to bring your own unique flavor to your books, to the industry, to the world. Otherwise, you're going to run into being called out as like an imposter or a mimic, and then your stuff's not original anymore.
And then it becomes more difficult not only to sell books, but to sell anything else that you've done.
Yeah, you got to stand out.
Yeah, imitation isn't always necessarily the sincerest form of flattery in that case.
Yeah.
Can you name 3 people then that you would like to have dinner with, alive or dead, where you could just talk about dissonance and the end? Who would you choose, and what would you learn from them?
Wow. I'm sure this answer will change like every interview. Number one would be Jesus, of course. I would love to talk to Jesus about it, just about a whole host of things, a million things. I would love to talk to Suzanne Collins. I love the Hunger Games. I think the premise of it is just absolutely brilliant. Her world is, post-apocalyptic to some degree, but much more so dystopian. And I love the world building that she did. And I'd love to ask her, how she structured that, how she went about creating her world building and creating the dichotomy and the struggle between the rich and the poor. I love that. The third one, gosh, I don't know. I mean, it would probably be somebody who is, a celebrity of some respect, but I would say let's bring in a second writer and bring in Tolkien. We have to resurrect him, of course. I love J.R.R. Tolkien's works. I love the movies. They have a special place in my heart. But the books themselves, I've probably read the trilogy, Lord of the Rings, at least 150 times. Some of the narratives and the dialogue and the world building, when I structured Dissonance and was hammering out those narratives, I really, incorporated some nods of the hat to Tolkien because he's just that brilliant. I'd love to see what he says about my work.
Nice. That's awesome. It's amazing who we read and how it informs ourselves. Like for me, I read Asimov and Heinlein and all of and Tolkien, obviously, and I was a big Dragonlance fan of the fantasy era of Hickman and Weiss there and all of that stuff. So I was kind of all over the place. But I love the fact that there's so many different genres nowadays that you can just dive into, and it just takes you to a different world and a different place.
Yeah, it's amazing. There's so many authors out there right now. I admin a roughly 31,000 member group, author group on Facebook. I admin that, and then I co-admin 2 other groups that probably constitutes maybe close to 50,000 authors. Some of them are aspiring, Some of them are perspiring, working hard day by day. Some of them are scammers, and we're slowly trying to purge those out because the authoring industry, unfortunately, is rife with scammers and spammers. The overwhelming majority of them are people who just they have such a unique story, and every time you get to know someone, a fellow author, and you hear what story they're working on, it's always a wow, really? Tell me more, because everybody just has this unique idea. Sometimes I think, like Ecclesiastes says, there's nothing new under the sun, but that really isn't true. There's a lot of things that touch on previous stuff, and there's things that have, tips of the hat to previous works, but everything kind of has its own spin and a new flavor. And anyway, it's cool to find out and learn that.
Being the fact that you're working in a group there, you're doing your own things, you're coaching, etc., all of those wonderful aspects of mentorship there. Everyone usually asks, what's the wisest piece of advice, or what's the most BS piece of advice you've ever received? But what is the second wisest piece of advice you've received that has stuck with you in your career?
I don't know if this is second or first, quite frankly, but one of the most memorable, certainly, bits of advice I was ever given was she's a former voiceover agent turned entrepreneur. And as a voiceover artist, I was really trying to just it was hard on the outside looking in, trying to, force my way into the speakers circuit and gain the favor from the Illuminati at the top that makes all the decisions as far as who gets to speak and share and coach and all that stuff. I remember Liz telling me someone's endorsement of you or lack thereof has very little to do with your trajectory. I had to stop and go, wait, say that again? And she said it again, and it was so memorable. So, as an author, you can get hung up on a bad review or less than desirable review. You can get hung up on whether people are buying your books or not. A lot of things to get hung up on. This phrase comes in such handy. Mind you, she gave it to me as a voiceover artist, but it comes in such handy as an author. Someone's endorsement of you, meaning buying your books or leaving you a bad review or whatever, or lack thereof, has very little to do with your trajectory. My trajectory, such a hard word. As a voiceover artist, I should have that. Trajectory is forward, is up, regardless of what people say. That's the mindset that you have to adopt and hold on to.
Nice. That's really good. Good advice. Something I haven't heard before, but that is now something that's going in my lexicon. So I appreciate that.
It's a great one.
When you've lost focus or you're just overwhelmed with, say, a particular chapter or one of your books or anything along that line here, how do you refocus and recenter yourself?
One of the things that I really like to do from the very beginning of a project is have the book cover designed. I'm a visual learner, and I like to see the end product and work my way towards that end product, have the end goal in mind. So I'll have the cover designed, and I'll have a 3D version of it made too, so I can see it that way. And if I need a reset button, that's it. A lot of ideas can just churn to the surface just simply by looking at that image again and going, I'll get there. I know I'll get there. And refreshing your mind to the possibility of that book. Now, I have a track record now I'm working on my 27th book. I have a track record of plenty of books I can look back at and say, I know I can do this. Um, people starting out, not so much. They don't have that luxury, but everything, progresses and you get there eventually. I just think for me, a reset button of being able to look back look forward and see that end product in mind, that's what keeps me going. That's what gives me motivation to start over again.
I've been doing this for 16 years, so 1,200 plus interviews. Everyone is new to me
Wow.
when it comes to talking with people. So I find it fascinating, people's process, because we always start from zero and we're always going towards a never ending end goal. At least you can see your end goal.
Yeah,
Podcasting's a
absolutely.
little different.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's dive into the Dissonance series, just and we'll use this for Dissonance as well as for the End. In the Dissonance or the End series, what was the most difficult scene to write, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Wow. I'm an emotional guy, number one. I'm sensitive. And I wrote the first death in Dissonance Volume I reality. A person gets set upon by a Gorgon. Now, Gorgons are the alien antagonists of the Dissonance saga, and this is them on the front. Here's a clearer picture. what they look like. It's kind of like a space octopus, I guess maybe you might say. But they're deadly. They're absolutely terrifying, and we call them gorgons because, like the mythical Medusa, you cannot under any circumstances look them in the eye. If you do, it's all over. They have a telepathic paralytic, and so they're going to look at you. They're going to freeze you where you stand, and then they're going to eat you at their leisure, and you're going to feel every agonizing bite. So they're horrible. I actually had someone set upon, they're a valuable person in the story. They get eaten, not, right away, but I was bawling in the writing. I was bawling in the editing, and I'm a voiceover artist. So I recorded the stories for these for Audible, and you'll hear me bawling in the Audible version. Uh, those were so hard to write. I absolutely detest playing God in my story making because it's just too much power.
Hmm.
And they are so precious, sacred, beautiful characters that I created, that I made, and to kill them off is just so heart wrenching. That would be it for sure.
It sounds like the George R. Martin method of, killing off characters just because he can't finish his sixth or seventh book.
Well, someone paid me a pretty high compliment in a review a while back of I think volume two, Reckoning of the Dissonance series, and they said one thing I realized at the end of this book is that no one is safe, just like in Game of Thrones, no one is safe, and I felt that was pretty high praise, and that's true. You have to be willing to part with your characters. Not that Tolkien wasn't brave enough to go there. Granted, he let Boromir be killed off, but all the other eight survive. Gandalf dies, but then comes back. And did he really die? I mean, come on. He's an Istari.
He probably just needed a break from all the walking, changed his clothes, came back in,
Yeah,
said, "Yeah, we're good."
he took a power nap.
It's a second nap. That's it.
Second nap.
You talked briefly at the beginning of the interview here about Dissonance being adapted for streaming platforms. How is that process and how's the pitching going for that? Like, what stage are you at currently with that? Because I do film and shorts and features and things like that as well. So I'm always curious about an author's approach to the media platform.
Yeah. So I was actually approached myself by the assistant to Alan Roth with Act Two Media. That was, I believe, in March of last year. And apparently I'd been making enough waves to, garner some kind of presence online. And his assistant approached me. I'm very cynical, very skeptical. I was like, yeah, I don't think this is legitimate. But I looked him up. I vetted him. He's on IMDb. He did win the contest that he said he did, that was won by several people, put on by Gail Ann Hurd, the former wife of James Cameron. I know who's that. Um, and I looked him up and vetted him, but I found him to be his rate to produce a screenplay. I Googled it, and he's right in the middle, so that was great. But I found him to be exceptionally collaborative. He'd made two big changes, deviations from my book, and I went, I, um, and I was like, "Can you not do that? Actually, that's a big departure." And so he was very kind. He went back, he undid those changes, went back to the original source material, and but he basically does the pitches all the time. I think he's done 10 or so far with big and medium studios, to actors themselves, going the actor route to try to get someone to attach to it. But we have monthly follow-ups where he says how the pitches have been going, who he has coming up next. And I think no one has said no to the project yet, except for two actors' agents. So that's good. I'm optimistic and excited. Dissonance is a huge, meaty story with a lot of good stuff to it. So someone would be out of their mind to not do it.
So a two or three movie arc, more than likely.
Well, more than likely, it will be episodic treatment on something like a streaming network. That tends to garner so much more community than a one-off, two-off, three-off movie. Don't tell that to George Lucas or Peter Jackson.
They've already made their billions.
Yeah, plenty of cult following for them. The tendency these days is to go the streaming route, so that is the direction that he's going.
No, that's good. I think it'll be interesting. Well, it depends on if they're going for a 28 or 58-minute series. I think it really depends. That the TV model of producing content is really not there anymore. It's there, but it's not, because you get so many people fast forwarding. Like you want them to stick around for that 58 minutes or whatever it is.
Right. As long as the end's good, as long as there's a cliffhanger, there you go. There are so many good series that are out there right now. I mean, it would be really competing for someone's attention, but the pilot is where you grab people and you hook them. And the pilot that he wrote is very close to the book, which I mean, I'm a big believer in my book. I wrote it. So it's got some good stuff and starts with action right away. It'll be cool to see how it works out.
Hopefully, you get some good actors and actresses that are attached to it, so you can realize your story in real life. And may the masses of the streaming platforms enjoy it all the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Gosh, I hate to just kind of beat a dead horse. That sounded awful talking about Tolkien. But when reading The Lord of the Rings, I just was absolutely impressed. And I'll never forget my initial encounters with some of the dialogue that Tolkien scribed in Lord of the Rings, especially between the powers that be. The dialogue that he has between like Saruman and Gandalf when Saruman is trapped in the Tower of Orthanc and Isengard and all the Ents are hurling themselves against it, and now they're calm, and here comes Gandalf to talk to him one last time. That dialogue is amazing, just amazing. The stories that are told and the way they're told in the chapter "The Shadow of the Past" or the chapter "The Council of Elrond" throughout the series, they're just so well written. I guess my parents, as a little boy, really encouraged me to do well in English. I did. Um, it's important because otherwise you're using base language that tends to lose people. You can't be too multisyllabic and articulate because then you tend to confuse people. So a nice middle ground, I think I've strived for and I've hit for the most part. People tell me it's an easy read.
Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Well, one person who really inspired me is a longtime friend named Frank Curtis, and it was kind of like anything you could do, I could do better. Frank became an author, and he'd written some I guess not really official memoirs or published a cookbook, but then he turned and he wrote a like an Italian uh, it's like mafioso, gangster type stories, and he's written I think six of them now, if I remember right. But Frank, I knew Frank. I know I can reach out and touch Frank. He's tangible. He's in my life, and he's like, "Wow, you became an author? Holy cow! If you can do it, so can I." Now, before he did that, I had actually already published some business reference books as a voiceover artist, six of them. But I had not done fiction for a really long time, and I certainly hadn't done it officially. So that's when I realized, in the wake of voiceovers, the industry kind of becoming a little scary, I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to pivot back to fiction authoring because I've done it before. If Frank can do it, why can't I?
From a professional standpoint, you're, of course, a successful voice actor and over 29 books currently, and I'm sure hundreds more are going down the pipe when it comes to being an author in that regard. So I can't wait to see what else you have created in the future here. So from a professional standpoint, you are successful. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
Yeah, and I say that humbly. One of the things I guess that I've always been able to do, and I don't know why I have this gene or this makeup, but is the ability to pivot, the ability to adapt and overcome. So I've worn a lot of hats over my career. When I provide my bio to people, they go, "You've done what and what and what and what and what and what?" And they're always, astonished by that. But that's the goal. That's the name of life. That's the way it goes. You have to adapt and overcome. You adapt or die is another variation of that phrase. So if I'm going to pat myself on the back for anything, it's being proud of just the ability to pivot when things are maybe not quite so certain. So I did it in 2006 into self-employment in 2007. Starting in 2007, I've been self-employed since 2007 through a variety of different media services. One of those things that I got sucked into, it's a vortex, just you never get out, is wedding videography. So I was doing that, and I don't know what happened, but there was a sea change in the industry where clients just got really mean and vindictive. And so I decided to get out. Before that, I had started voiceovers, but in 2019, I saw the writing on the wall, decided I was going to pull out, and I did. And then voiceovers took off. Voiceovers are crumbling a little bit, so I decided to pivot back to authoring, and I'm waiting for that to still take off. I've done very, very, very well, but here's the book sales, and here's the investment financially. So one of these days, it'll go like that as a non-union, no, sorry, not a non-union, as a self-published author. I got my work cut out for me a little bit more than a traditionally pubbed one, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. There are several people who have made it as self-published authors. Why can't I? If Frank Curtis can do it, why can't I?
The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
Well, they're all learning experiences. They're all learning opportunities, of course. And a failure is a really strong word to apply. I never like to apply a label to a person. To what they've done, maybe, sure. And I learned the hard way as a musician. I was a Christian musician for a few years, and one was artistically successful commercial failure. The other one was artistically failure and a commercial success. And I think that it was hard to, I wished both could be artistically and a commercial success. But you just learn from it and you try the next time and you have to take notes. You can be bummed for a while. I certainly was. And go, dang, I want to get this in people's hands. But I think that you just have to learn from it and develop thick skin each time, thicker skin each time. March on. If this is something that you want and it's your passion, keep going. It's that trajectory phrase again.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way. And the fact that you have the younger generation with you, with currently your two boys, maybe you're inspiring them down a creative path in some way, shape, or form. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Yeah, and I hope they do, and I know they will. My boys are very creative, number one. I don't know where they get it. My wife is creative as well. I mean, as a poet and an editor, she's very creative. I think my boys are doing that even right now. They just inspire people, older and younger generations, with what they create. Brennan is exceptionally talented with crafts, and I'm talking like 3D creations that he makes and tapes together and colors and all that stuff. For an 8-year-old, he has a multi-dimensional mind, and I think he's going to make a lot of money someday, and I want some of it. Um, Asher is much more intellectual, much more, I think, grounded. Brennan has his, head in the clouds, and Asher has his feet on the ground. And I think Asher is going to balance. And I just love how that works out because you can't plan that. Let's make this one artistic and let's make this one really intellectual. Press the ingredients, drop the ingredients button. They just turned out that way. But I think both of them are a really good balance to each other. And I think that dynamic alone is going to be inspirational to people.
Wonderful. All right. Last question is this, and this is the fun one to wrap up the interview itself here before we talk about where we can find you in social media and all that other stuff at the end. If your life was a novel, what would its title be? And what would its soundtrack be?
I think the title would be some variation on the word legacy, because every career that I've had has been about leaving a legacy. Every self-employment career, I should say, has been about leaving a legacy. I was a memorial videographer, capturing someone's life, wedding videographer, capturing their first moments together, as husband and wife. I was a video transfer operator, so I would transfer people's old tapes to DVD and to MP4 and all of that, and preserving those memories. I was a legacy video capture where you'd go interview old elderly folks and get their story on camera to present to their future generations. A voiceover artist. I am a storyteller telling people's stories that are always going to be in some form of either audio or video and audio together. And there are records of them all over the internet. I swear, the people who are harvesting voice recordings online and making synthetic voices of them, I know I'm out there somewhere because there's plenty of my voice out there to grab. So as a voiceover artist, I'm doing that. One thing I'm really proud of in terms of legacy is I've kept a journal for both of my boys virtually every single day of their life, starting when Brennan, my oldest, was 3 months old. So yes, I've missed days here and there, but I'm going to give it to them when they're 18 and say, this is how much I was thinking about you. And this is a journal of, your entire life, your developments, your first steps, your first date, where we went here, vacations, life together. And I can't wait. And that's just a really cool thing I get to do as a dad. So that's what they would say on my tombstone. And yeah, sorry, not epitaph. Boy, I went to a grave spot there. The song, I really like the song Fire by Gavin DeGraw, but I also really like the song Empathy by Alanis Morissette. I could play Empathy. I believe it's called Empathy over and over and over again. Thank you for seeing me. I feel so less lonely. Thank you for getting me. I'm healed by your empathy. I think as an artist, oftentimes you can feel misunderstood. That wasn't what I was trying to say. You completely missed the point of the book. It's a hard thing as a creator to put something out there and have people go, you know. So I probably would say empathy. Thank you for seeing me. I feel so less lonely. Thank you for getting me. I'm healed by your empathy.
Well, Aaron, I do hate to say it, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I loved being a geek. Woo! Long live geeks.
Before I let you go, where can we find you? How can we support you? Of course, any other websites or social media you'd like to promote? And when is The End or Dissonance available for purchase?
Yeah, my favorite question. You can go to authoraaronryan.com. I need to clarify it's not awfulaaronryan.com. It's authoraaronryan.com. But on a lark, since I kept saying that, I just said, I'm just going to get it. So you can actually go to awfulaaronryan.com now, and it'll forward you to my Author Aaron Ryan site. Or you can go to getthesebooks.com, which is the forwarding URL for the Dissonance series. That is my 6-book alien invasion hexalogy that is such a deep work of passion and thematic depth. That's getthesebooks.com. And you can go to thisisnottheend.com, which is the Christian clean fiction post-apocalyptic saga that I'm working on, Volume 1. I'm currently at 254 pages, so I'm coming up on the end. See what I did there? I just can't wait to write to be continued instead of the end at the end of that one. So authoraaronryan.com, getthesebooks.com, thisisnottheend.com.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, Aaron, got to have you back on in the future for sure. We'll talk about any other works that you're doing, see how your career is continuously taking off, and, give some words of advice to those future writers there that happen to watch this interview.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
You can, of course, find this interview and 100 plus others on our YouTube channel that's always updated, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast you can find at twogeekstalking.podbean.com or just search Two Geeks Talking wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.